Good morning. My name is Dhruv, and I'm going to be talking about my research project, which was what causes the differences between the fight and flight responses. So basically what I studied was what variables control a person's ability to respond to a stressful situation or fear-inducing stimuli with a fight response or a flight response. Alright, so here's my table of contents. I'm going to just start with an introduction to my topic. I'm going to go into my methodology. Then I'll dive into the results of my experiment and what I'm going to conclude from it. Alright, so introduction. So, for those of you who don't know, the fight or flight response is an involuntary and spontaneous reaction to an impending danger. So what this means is that the fight or flight response is how the body naturally reacts to when a person's put in a situation where they need to either respond quickly or they're forced to respond. So I got this quote from Eileen Bailey, who's an author who's published numerous health-related books on psychological issues and also just regular health issues. So an example of the fight or flight response would be, let's say a hiker is in the woods and there's a bear there. So usually the fight or flight response occurs when a person is startled by some stimuli that is sudden, but with bears, they're loud and they can growl pretty loudly, so that bear's growl would be loud enough to startle the hiker, and that point at which the hiker is startled is the first stage in the fight or flight response, and then how the body responds from there is if the body chose whether or not to respond with the fight and with flee. Alright, so I have a quick diagram here about how the fight or flight response works biologically. So this diagram doesn't really show it, but the fight or flight response actually starts in the eyes and the ears, because those are your two receptors in your body that allow you to take in information. So when the eyes or the ears see something sudden, that sounds the alarm to start the fight or flight response. So the eyes and the ears send information to the amygdala in the brain, which then reacts to the threat and then sends a distress signal to the hypothalamus. So the hypothalamus is part of something called the sympathetic nervous system, and what the sympathetic nervous system does is it's in control of what actually happens after the fight or flight reaction starts. So that's when someone's feeling more pumped. So the sympathetic nervous system, when it's activated, then releases adrenaline, and that's what gets the body into motion and gets people able to be equipped to start responding to whatever threat they're in front of. Alright, so when I was researching, I found three variables that seem to impact the fight or flight response the most. This is an illustration of stress. It's from an image I found online. Stress is commonly associated with the fight or flight response because stress is what causes a person to be on the edge the most. People who are stressed spend a lot of time thinking about things. They're usually more receptive or more retaining of information or bad experiences that happens to them. So in this illustration basically shows someone that is stressed and anxious because of that. So which also further shows that stress keeps a person mentally unstable enough for the fight or flight reaction. Alright, so the next factor is anticipation. So anticipation and stress go hand in hand, but if someone anticipates fear-inducing stimuli, they're either more likely to get their body ready or more likely to flee, because what I've realized is through my studies is that anticipation can make someone more mentally prepared. Like if there's some sort of anticipation factor, such as ominous music or a jump scare, either tells the brain to start preparing for something that will come, or it just gets the brain ready to flee. And the last one is confidence. So confidence is how a person walks into a situation. So people who are confident are more likely to react or be confrontational to any sort of fear-inducing stimuli. So confidence is the last factor that separates the fight or flight reaction, as what I've seen is people who are more confident in situations that they're accustomed to are gonna react fight, but this hasn't necessarily been approved before. So again, the three impacting variables I'm going to be looking at are stress, anxiety, and confidence. So my gap for my experiment and what I was really trying to study was how does the correlation between stress, anticipation, and confidence impact a person's response to fear-inducing stimuli? So what combination of these three variables would cause a person to respond with fight rather than flight, and vice versa? So now I'm going to be going into my methodology that I use for my experiment. So when I was researching, I also found confounding variables that could impact my research. So these are things that could make my experiment unsafe. So because I always knew that I wanted to generally test the fight or flight reaction on someone, but I can't necessarily do that unless if someone has certain health conditions that prevent them from being like safe while being scared. So the three confounding variables I had to overcome for this were I had to address people who had specific health issues, so more specifically high blood pressure or had like a familiar history of like heart attacks. People who had extreme stress levels. Now I'm going to be studying stress, but people with extreme stress levels are at a higher risk of being negatively impacted biologically by the fight or flight reaction, and how familiar a person is with the content. So I also figured out that if someone's really familiar with the content, they're just not going to react if you try scaring them with a jump scare. So I had to overcome familiarity by also setting another experiment, including that as a part of another experiment. So, but this is what I used to get my consent from the participants and for the sign up. So over here I had a list of a variety of different things I would use to scare people. So I had multiple options in order to make sure that I only usually did the jump scare, but I had multiple options just to make sure they were comfortable with at least the one I was going to be using. So, and then I also made sure for people under 18 and people who didn't have enough consent to get parental signature and also the student signature. Then after they completed this form, I did a sign-up sheet. So the sign-up sheet just asked for their information. And then I asked them again how comfortable they were being scared, because if they're also too uncomfortable, they could be at risk of potentially harming themselves. And what stimuli they would be uncomfortable with, because again, I did have a variety of stimuli that I used, and also this is where I asked about familiar health heart conditions. So I developed 3 separate tests that I would use for my experiment. So I had the anticipation test, the confidence test, and the jump scare test. And I'm going to be talking about these next. Alright, so the confidence test. The confidence test was meant for people in the high stress group. This was the test that was meant for the people that were at most risk of being actually scared, so I didn't actually perform a jump scare on them. So the point of this test was to test how confident a person felt in a situation where they'd potentially be in a fight or flight, against a fight or flight stimuli. So I asked them how comfortable they were against a variety of stimuli such as bears, sharks. I saw a video of someone disguising themselves as a bush and jump scaring people, and then avalanche, cave-ins, and people being held at gunpoint. So what I did with why I chose these specific stimuli is because I found experiences online that people have shared that discussed how they reacted in these actual situations, which would help me compare like how people in my class perceive how confident they are. So I just tested how confident a person is. I asked them from 1 to 10, how well do you think you would do in a situation if you're against a bear, a shark, and then I just compared that to the sources I found. So the second test I had was an anticipation test. This is for the medium stress group, but I also used it on the high stress group. And if you had permission from the high stress group and you didn't have familiar heart condition, I was able to do the anticipation test. So this anticipation test included 2 jump scares. So there was one with and one without an anticipation factor. So an example of an anticipation factor was this dark music that I played in the background of one of the jump scares. So basically what I did is I played 2 separate jump scares, and to test how someone's response changes from anticipation, I played an anticipation factor during the second jump scare, and then tracked the results. And the third test was just a normal jump scare test. This was just for the people in the low stress group, but the medium stress groups could also do it if they had that special permission. So an example of this is I looked up movie jump scares because I've seen quite a bit of scary movies, so I was just looking at what stimuli a person's least likely to have seen. So I looked up movie jump scares, also just regular jump scares that I found on YouTube. So these jump scares were just to test how a person was, someone in a low stress group or a medium stress group would react to fight or flight stimuli, and how that would change the way they reacted. So I'm going to be now going into my results and conclusions for my experiment. So here's some sample results from my experiment. This is from participant number 4. So this also shows what I tried keeping track of. So I made sure to keep track of what stress level they were in. So participant number 4 was particularly in the low stress group, so I know I could do the anticipation and jump scare tests on them. So then I kept track of their results. So this was from before the anticipation factor. This particular participant didn't seem to have a reaction before the anticipation factor, and also any comments I had based off of their behavior. And then after the anticipation factor, how they seemed to react. So this participant had more of a fight reaction, which meant they clenched their fist, which is what I was looking for when I was doing my results. I looked for this external stimuli, like if someone was startled or someone clenches their fist. So if someone's startled, I considered that a flight reaction. If someone clenched their fist, I said that was a fight reaction. So I said that this was a fight reaction because they clenched his fist. And then I just did a regular jump scare test in which they had a flight reaction. But they also, this last question checks for that familiarity extra variable that I was trying to count for. This participant hadn't seen anything like it, so they didn't have any extra comments. And then this is also another sample result from experiment from participant number 5. They were in the medium group, but they had permission to do all 3 tests. So this also displays the results from my confidence test. So I asked them from 1 to 5 how confident they were. These percentages are just 1 divided by 10, 5 divided by 10. So they said they were 50% confident against the bear, and vice versa for the rest. Alright, so here are my results for each of the tests. So for the confidence test, I decided to go by if someone was more than 50% confident in a situation, I considered that as a fight reaction, or if they're under 50% confident, that was a flight reaction. So based off all the stimuli, I went to, I checked the number of people who had flight reactions and flight reactions. So for the bear, that was 3 of my 7 participants who actually did the confidence test had the flight reaction. So I had a total of 8 participants, so only 1 person didn't have to do the confidence test, but the rest did. So 3 of my participants had said they would most likely fight a bear. 2 said they would fight a shark for some reason. 7 of 7 said they would attack the person in the bush, and nobody said they would be willing to confront an avalanche in a cave-in. And 4 out of 7 people said that they could confront someone that was holding them in company. So the conclusions I got from my confidence test showed me that compared to documented experiences online, the only 2 experiments that showed people have a false perception of confidence were the people who said they would confront people, confront a shark or someone who was holding them at gunpoint, as I found numerous sources online of people reacting with a flight reaction in either of those situations. But this made me, the results of my experiment allowed me to conclude that confidence leads to a fight reaction. So that's an old thing. So for the anticipation test, it was around the same thing, but this time I just tracked how their response changed after the anticipation factor. So for participant number 2, that was going from a fight reaction to no reaction, and then vice versa all the way down. So for my anticipation test, 2 out of my 6 participants had a worse reaction, which meant they went from flight to a more extreme version of flight. So someone was once startled, but once they were anticipating it, they seemed to have a worse reaction, while 4 of the 6 participants acted more confrontationally. So that was either just not responding, or they fought after they had the anticipation effect, which made me believe that if someone since there were more people who acted confrontationally afterwards than having a worse reaction, this made me believe that anticipation causes a fight reaction. And for the last test, it was a jump scare test. I had 4 participants do this one, so this was just a regular jump scare to see which ones, how the participants reacted. So these were just results. So participant 3 acted with flight, participant 4 had no reaction, and these were all comments they had. These comments helped me figure out how familiar the person was with their stimuli. So with that, I was able to determine that people who were familiar with the content, which were only 3 people, so 2 of those 3 people were more confident after they were more familiar with it, while people with a higher stress level, so there were 2 people with a medium stress level, so the people with a higher stress level responded with flight rather than fight. So this allowed me to get 2 conclusions from this, which was that a higher stress level leads to a flight reaction, and that familiarity to the content leads to a fight reaction. That is it.
Okay, first question. What was the most important source of information you found while conducting your research, and why was it important to your research process?
So the most important piece of information I found was that first source that let me see the impact stress had on the fight or flight reaction. That let me look into what variables or what other variables could impact the fight or flight reaction. So since I figured out stress could, I researched what other variables could also impact it. So that allowed me to get all 3 variables and create my gap.
What might be the real-world implications or influences on others' behaviors, decision-making process, or discoveries related to your findings?
So I believe that the confidence test is, the results from the confidence test are more applicable to a lot of people here, because it shows that if you have a false perception of confidence, that's not going to always help you in a situation where you need to react. So if there's a bear, like in my experiment, a lot of people said that people like to fight a bear, but that's also a situation where online they said that it's more likely to react with people more likely react with flight. So people that have that false perception of confidence, like kind of like invalidates that.
If you had 3 more weeks to work on this research question or project, what additional research strategies would you put into practice?
I would definitely try and get more participants for my experiment, because I could have a bit more people of different stress levels and psychological compositions to look at the exact combination of variables, and because I might have not addressed enough of how stress relates to anticipation and how both of those together relate to how your fight or flight reaction is.
Any other questions from the panel? Any questions from the audience? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.